Chapter 1 of Book 2 of Metaphysics by Aristotle. Translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. For the advancement of the science under investigation, it is necessary for us, first, to take a review of those points respecting which one ought to doubt in the first instance, but these are whatsoever subjects some speculators have entertained opinions of after a different mode, and whatever, beyond these, may happen to have been overlooked. For it will contribute towards one's object, who wishes to acquire a facility in the gaining of knowledge, to doubt judiciously, for a subsequent acquisition in the way of knowledge is the solution of previous doubts. But when one is ignorant of the bond of a thing, it is not possible for such to loose it. But the perplexity of the intellect makes manifest this assertion respecting the matter in hand. For, so far forth as the dianoetic faculty doubts, so far does it undergo something similar to persons loaded with chains, for it is impossible in both cases to advance further. Wherefore it is necessary in the first instance to speculate into all the difficulties involved in the present subject, both on account of these things and also from the fact that they who carry on an investigation without doubting first are similar to persons ignorant where they ought to walk, and in addition to these things, neither can such know whether he has discovered the object of his speculation or not. For the end is not manifest to this speculator, but to one who has previously doubted, in a judicious way it is manifest. But, further, there is a necessity that a person should be better qualified for forming a judgment, who has heard all the reasons, as it were, of adversaries and opposing disputants. Now, the first source of perplexity is concerning those things which we have expressed doubts of in our preface, namely, whether to speculate into causes be the province of one or many sciences, and whether it be the province of this science to discover merely the primary principles of substance, or also to speculate concerning the first principles from which all derive their demonstrations, as, for instance, whether it is possible to affirm and deny one and the same thing at the same time or not, and concerning the other things of such a kind. And if it is the province of this science to be conversant about substance, whether one may be about all, or whether there be many such in existence, and if many, whether all are akin to each other, or it may be proper to style some of them sciences of wisdom, and others of them something else. And this very thing is amongst the necessary points of investigation, whether it should be affirmed that sensible substances exist only, or whether others also subsist in addition to these, and whether there is a genus singly, or a number of genera of substances, according to the opinion of those who introduce both forms and mathematical entities as things intermediate between these and sensibles. Concerning these, therefore, as we have said, an examination must be made, and also concerning substances, whether the speculation extend only to them, or to the essential accidents of these substances. But, in addition to these points, we might inquire in regard of sameness, and diversity, and similarity and dissimilarity, and identity and contrariety, and concerning priority, and subsequence, and all the rest of such things, concerning as many as the dialecticians endeavour to examine, instituting their inquiries from matters merely of opinion. We might, I say, investigate whose province it is to speculate into all of these. Further, may one investigate whatsoever things are essential accidents in these very things, both not only what each of them is, but also whether in truth one be contrary to one, and whether genera are first principles and elements, or those things into which, as being inherent, each thing is divided, and if the genera are so, whether they are such things as are predicated last, or the first concerning individuals, as, for example, whether animal or man be a first principle, and be so rather than a singular. But most especially must we investigate and examine with pains as to whether besides matter there is any absolute cause or not, and whether this is separate or not, and whether it be one, or such causes may be many in number, and whether there is anything beside entirety. But I mean by entirety when anything has been predicated of matter, or nothing, or whether this is the case with some things indeed, but not so with others, and what sort of entities such are. Moreover, whether first principles are limited in number, or in species, both those that subsist in formal causes, and those that are in the subject, and whether of things corruptible and incorruptible the principles be the same or different, and whether all are incorruptible, or whether of corruptible things there are corruptible principles. Moreover also, the most difficult of all, and involving the greatest perplexity, is the inquiry whether unity and entity, as the Pythagoreans and Plato used to affirm, be not anything else but the substance of entities, or this be not the case, but that there be some other subject, as Empedocles says harmony is, and a certain other philosopher fire, and another water or air, and whether first principles are universal, or are as the singulars of things, and whether they subsist in capacity or in energy, further, whether they subsist otherwise than according to motion. For also these speculations would furnish much perplexity. But in addition to these points, there remains the inquiry whether numbers and dimensions and figures and points be certain substances or not, and if they are substances, whether they are capable of being separated from sensibles, or be inherent in them. For concerning all of these questions, not only is it difficult successfully to attain unto the truth, but neither is a judicious doubting easy for the reasoning faculties. Chapter 2. In the first place, indeed, therefore, let us institute an inquiry concerning the first assertions which we have made, namely, whether to speculate concerning all kinds of causes be the province of one or many sciences. For how would it be the province of a single science to take cognizance of existing first principles, when they are not contrary to each other? But further, in the case of many of the entities, all do not exist in all of them. For in what way is it possible for the principle of motion to be found in things incapable of motion, or that the nature of the good should, if everything which may be essentially good, and by reason of its own nature, is an end, and so a cause, inasmuch as on account of that other things are both produced and exist? But the end and the final cause are an end of any action, and all things in the act of doing are attended with motion. Therefore, in things incapable of motion, it would not be possible that this should exist as the first principle, or that there be therein any essential good. Wherefore also, in mathematics, nothing is demonstrated through this cause, nor is there any demonstration for the reason that a thing is better or worse. But neither does any mathematician make mention at all of any such thing whatsoever. Therefore, for this reason, certain of the sophists, as for example Aristippus, regarded these sciences with disdain. For in the other arts, even the mechanical ones themselves, as in those of carpentry and shoemaking, he said that wherefore a thing is better or worse could be declared in every respect, but that the mathematical sciences make no account concerning things good and evil. But truly, if there are, at least, many sciences of causes, and different sciences of a different first principle, which of these must be said to be the one under investigation, or whom of those that are in possession of them shall we pronounce scientifically informed, particularly in the matter under inquiry? For in the same subject is it possible that all the modes of causes exist, as, for example, of a house, the origin of the principle of motion is from art and the builder, and the final cause is the work, but the matter is earth and stones, and the form is the definition. From the distinctions, therefore, laid down by us originally as to which of the sciences we ought to denominate wisdom, is involved a reason for further styling each thus. For as far as a science is most qualified for the preeminence and for superiority over the rest, and so far as it is just that as servants the rest of the sciences should not contradict, so far such is a science of the end and of the good, for the rest of things are on account of this. But as far as wisdom has been defined a science of first causes, and of that which is especially capable of being scientifically known, so far such would be a science of substance. For, seeing that persons may acquire the same knowledge by many methods, we say that he rather understands a thing who makes known by its being what that thing is, than by its not being. And of these themselves, one in preference to another, and particularly he who knows what a thing is, and not he who knows the quantity or the quality of a thing, or what it is by nature fitted for in the way of action or of passion. Further, in the case of other things, the understanding each of those subjects concerning which there are demonstrations, we think then to have an existence when we may understand what a thing is. For instance, what the squaring of a right-lined figure is, that it is the finding of a mean proportional. In like manner is it in the case of the rest. But with regard to generations, and actions, and every kind of change, we are in a way of understanding each, when we understand the first principle of motion, and this is different, and in opposition to the end. Wherefore it would appear to belong to the department of a different science to investigate each of these causes. But truly, also, with regard to demonstrative first principles, whether they belong to one science, or more, is a question open to doubt. But I term demonstrative even those common opinions from which all derive their demonstrations, for instance, that everything must needs be either an affirmation or negation, and that it is impossible for the same thing to be and not to be at the same time, and whatsoever other such propositions there are. It is, I say, a question open to doubt whether there be one science of these and of substance, or a different one, and, if not one, whether it is necessary to denominate as such the science under investigation. Therefore it would not then appear reasonable, indeed, that it should be the province of one science. For why, in preference, should the perception concerning these peculiarly belong to geometry rather than to any other science whatsoever? If therefore, in like manner, truly it belongs to any whatsoever, but it does not admit of belonging to all the sciences, as neither is it the peculiarity of the rest, so neither is it the province of that science which makes known the substances to investigate concerning these. But at the same time also, in what way will it be the science of these? For what each of these happens to be, we also now know. The rest of the arts, therefore, employ them as things known. But if there be a demonstrative science concerning them, it will be necessary that there be a certain subject genus, and that some of these indeed should be passive properties, and others axioms. For concerning all things it is impossible that there should be a demonstration. For demonstration must needs be composed of certain principles, and be conversant respecting some thing, and the demonstration of some things. Wherefore it happens that there is one particular genus of all things that are being demonstrated, for all the demonstrative sciences employ axioms. But truly, if there be a science on substance different from the one concerning these, which of them is by nature fitted to be more sovereign and prior? For especially and universally the principles of all things are the axioms. And if this is not the part of the philosopher, whose else will it be to speculate into the truth and falsehood regarding these? And upon the whole, whether of all substances is there one science or more? If indeed, therefore, there is not one science of such, what sort of substance must we consider as the subject matter of this science of ontology? But that there should be one science of all substances is not reasonable, for there would be one demonstrative science concerning all things that are essential accidents, if every demonstrative science in respect of a certain subject speculates into essential accidents from general opinions. Respecting then the same genus, it is the province of the same science to investigate the essential accidents from these same general opinions. For an examination respecting the wherefore belongs to one science, and to one respecting those elements whereof a thing consists, whether both investigations belong to the same or a different science. Wherefore, the like will take place in regard of accidents, whether these will investigate them, or one of those. But, further, might we examine whether the speculation is confined only to substances, or is also concerning the accidents in these. But I say, for example, if a solid be a certain substance, and lines and surfaces, whether it be the province of the same science to take cognizance of these things, and of the accidents of each genus about which the mathematical sciences demonstrate, or if it be the province of a different one. For if, indeed, of the same there would be a certain demonstrative science, and that the science of substance, but of the essence, or formal cause, there does not appear to be a demonstration. But if of a different science, what will be the science that speculates about the accidents of substance? For this would be altogether difficult to render an account of. Further, also, whether must we say that there are sensible substances only, or also, besides these, others, and whether do the genera of these substances happen to subsist singly, or are they more numerous, as, for instance, they who speak both of forms and media between forms, and things sensible concerning which, they say, are conversant the mathematical sciences. As to the assertion, then, indeed, that we have made, namely, that forms are causes and substances absolutely subsisting, it has been declared in the earliest of our disquisitions concerning these. But as these inquiries in many ways are clogged with difficulties, it would be no less absurd the assertion that there are indeed certain natures besides those which are in the heavens, and that these are the same with things sensible, except that the former are indeed eternal, and the latter corruptible. For they speak of the existence of ideal man, and ideal horse, and ideal health, but say nothing else in regard of these, acting in a way similar to those who affirm the existence of the gods, no doubt, but in the shape of men. For neither did these latter constitute aught, save eternal men, nor do the former make species anything else, but eternal sensibles. But further, if in addition also to forms and sensibles, any will set down things intermediate, he will be involved in many doubts. For it is evident that in like manner there will be lines, and each of the other genera, besides also them that are sensible. Wherefore, since astrology is one of these, there will also be a certain heaven besides the sensible heaven, and a certain other sun and moon, and so with the rest, in like manner, of the bodies that are situated in the heavens. Although, how need one place confidence in such statements as these? For neither is it reasonable that this ideal heaven should be incapable of motion, but also that it should be capable of motion is altogether impossible. In like manner also is it the case concerning the objects whereof optical science treats, and that of harmonics in mathematics. For also it is impossible that these should have a subsistence different from sensibles through the same causes. For if things sensible and senses have an intermediate subsistence, it is manifest also that there will be animals which will be media between them, and things corruptible. But one would doubt also concerning what sort of entities it is necessary for these sciences to investigate. For if geodesy will differ from geometry in this only, that one is conversant about things which we perceive by the senses, but the other about things that are not cognizant by sense, it is manifest that besides the medicinal science, and besides each of the rest, there will be a certain science intermediate between the healing art itself and this particular art of medicine, although indeed how is this possible? For also would there be, in such a case, certain salubrious qualities in addition to those that are sensible, and to the salubrious itself. But, at the same time, neither is this true, that geodesy is conversant about sensible magnitudes, and those that are corruptible. For it would fall into decay when they were in process of being destroyed. But truly, neither will astronomy be conversant about sensible magnitude, nor about yon heaven. For neither are the lines that fall under the cognizance of the senses the same as the geometrician describes them. For not of the things that are perceived by the senses is in this way strictly straight or round. For the circle touches the rule not in a point, but as Protagoras was accustomed to say in his refutation of the geometricians. Neither are the motions and the evolutions of the heavens similar to those about which astrology has formed its systems, nor have the symbols the same nature with the stars. But there are some persons who say that these reputed media between forms and sensibles are not indeed separable from sensibles, at least, but inherent in them. And to enumerate all the impossibilities attendant upon these statements would require a more copious discourse, but even it will be sufficient to speculate thus much on this point. For neither is it reasonable that this should be so in the case of these merely, but it is evident that it would be possible also for forms to subsist in sensibles, for both of these are results of the same process of reasoning. But further must there needs be two solids in the same place, and these mathematical entities must needs not be things incapable of motion, seeing that they at least subsist in sensibles that are being moved. And in short, on what account will any one lay down their having a subsistence indeed, and a subsistence in sensibles? For the same absurdities, with the things that have been previously spoken, will ensue. For there will be a certain heaven in addition to the heaven we see, except that it will not be separate, but in the same place, which is still more absurd. Chapter 3. Now, respecting these points, much doubt therefore prevails, namely, how it is necessary by forming one's opinion thereupon to attain unto the truth, and likewise, respecting first principles, whether it is requisite to consider the genera as elements and first principles, or in preference those things from which, as inherent, each first thing consists. As, for example, the elements and first principles of voice appear to be those things from which all voices are composed primarily, but not the voice in common. And we say that those things are elements of figures, the demonstrations of which are inherent in the demonstrations either of all or of the greater part of other things. But further, both some in affirming that there are many elements of bodies, and others that there is one, of which they are composed, and from which they consist, assert these to be the first principles, as, for example, Empedocles asserts that fire and water and the elements subsisting along with these are those from which, as being inherent, entities derive their existence. But he does not speak of these as the genera of entities. And in addition to these statements, we may subjoin the remark that if any one wishes to contemplate the nature of the rest of things, as for example a bed, of what parts it consists, and how those parts are put together, in that case he is acquainted with the nature of it. From these reasons, therefore, it would appear that first principles would not be the genera of entities, but so far forth as we obtain a knowledge of each thing by means of the definition, and so far as first principles are the genera of definitions, it is necessary also that first principles be the genera of things capable of definition. And likewise, if to acquire the science of the forms according to which entities are denominated is to acquire the science of entities themselves, in this case the genera of the forms are first principles, but those also who affirm that the elements of entities are unity or entity, or the great and the little, appear to employ these as genera. But neither, truly, in both cases is it possible, at least, to affirm also that they are first principles, for indeed of substance there is one reason, or formal principle. Different, however, will be the definition through the genera, and that which declares the entities whereof, as inherent, a thing consists. If also, most especially, in addition to these things, the genera are first principles, whether is it necessary to regard the first of the genera to be principles, or the lowest that are predicated of individuals? For this also is involved in doubt. For if indeed it is requisite that universals are first principles in a more eminent degree, it is evident that the topmost genera will be first principles, for these are predicated of all things. Therefore the first principles of entities will be as numerous as the first genera, so that unity and entity will be first principles and substances, for these especially are predicated of all entities. But it is not possible that there should be one genus of entities, or that unity or entity should be such, for it is necessary indeed that the differences of each genus both exist, and that each should be one. But it is impossible either for the species to be predicated about the proper differences of the genus, or for the genus to subsist independent of the species of itself. Wherefore, if unity or entity be a genus, neither will entity or unity constitute any difference. But, doubtless, unless there be genera, there will not be first principles, since genera are first principles. Further also, media that are comprehended along with the differences will be genera as far as to individuals, but now this appears to be the case with some and not with others. And further, in addition to these things, we may add that the differences are rather first principles than the genera. But if these also are first principles become infinite, so to speak, and this is especially the case if one should constitute the first genus a first principle. But truly, if also the one rather be that which is principle, and if one be a thing that is indivisible, and everything that is indivisible is so, either according to quantity or according to species, and if that which is according to species have a prior subsistence, and the genera are more divisible into species, one would be predicated last, for man is not a genus of certain particular men. Further, of those things wherein the prior and subsequent are inherent, it is not possible that what is predicated of them would be anything different from these. For instance, if a duad be the first of numbers, there will not be any number different from the species of numbers, and in like manner, rather, will there be figures in addition to the species of figures. But if this is not the case in regard of these, hardly at least will there be genera of other things in addition to the species, for of these there seem especially to be genera. But in individuals there is not one thing that is prior and another that is subsequent. Further, where one thing is better and another worse, that which is better always is prior, so that none of these could be a genus. From these statements indeed therefore it appears that those things that are predicated of individuals are first principles rather than the genera. But again, how on the other hand it is necessary to regard these as first principles, it would not be easy to express. For it is requisite that there should be a first principle, and a cause exclusive of the things of which there is a first principle, and that it should be capable of subsisting in a condition of separation therefrom. But as to the existence of some such thing besides the singular, why should one make a supposition to this effect, except that it is predicated universally, and of all things? But if, indeed, this is done on this account, in such a case universals are to be set down as first principles in a more eminent degree, so that the first genera would be principles. End of chapter 3. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 4 of Book 2 of Metaphysics by Aristotle. Translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 4. But a doubt closely connected with the foregoing is one which, of all, is both the most difficult and the most requisite to examine into, concerning which our treatise at present is immediately occupied. For if there is not anything beside singulars, and if singulars are infinite, how is it possible to be in possession of a science of things that are infinite? For as far as there is something that is one and the same, and as far as there is something that is universal, so far do we attain a knowledge of all things. But, doubtless, if this be necessary, and if there must needs be something in addition to singulars, it would be requisite that there be genera in addition to singulars, whether they are the lowest or the highest. But that this is impossible, we have ourselves just now expressed a doubt. But, further, if most especially there is something besides the entire, when anything has been predicated concerning matter, whether, if there be a certain form, must there needs be something universal in addition to some, and not in addition to other things, or is there nothing universal besides singulars? If then there is nothing universal besides singulars, there would not be anything that is cognizable by the mind. But all things would fall beneath the notice of the senses, and there would not be a scientific knowledge of anything, unless one would assert the exercise of the senses to be science. Further, would there be nothing eternal or immovable, for all things sensible are in a process of corruption, and are in motion. But, truly, if there is, at least, nothing that is eternal, neither is it a thing possible that there should be generation. For there must needs be something, namely, that which is being produced, and wherefrom it is produced, and of these the last must be ingenerable, if both the progress of successive productions is to stop at all, and if generation from nonentity should be a thing that is impossible. But, moreover, on the supposition of such things being in existence as generation and motion, there must needs be a limit likewise, for neither is any motion infinite, but of every motion is there an end. But that cannot be produced which it is impossible could have been produced. But that which has been produced must needs exist when first it has been produced. But, further, if matter be an existence from the fact of its being ingenerable, still it is much more reasonable that substance should have a subsistence when that is generated so as to have a being. For if neither substance nor matter shall have an existence, neither will there be anything at all in existence. But if this be impossible, there must needs be something in addition to the entire, namely, the form and species. Yet if, on the other hand, any one will establish this dogma, a doubt presents itself, both in the case of what things one should make this assertion, and in the case of what one should not. For that this is not possible in the case of all is evident, for we would not posit existence of any particular house in addition to certain houses. But, in addition to the foregoing points, we may subjoin the inquiry, whether will there be one substance of all things, for instance, of men? Now, this is absurd, for all things are not one of which the substance is one, but are many and different. This, however, also is an unreasonable statement, and at the same time also, how would matter become each of these, and how is the entire both of these? But, further, respecting first principles, we would also entertain this particular doubt. For if, indeed, they are one in species, not will there be that is one in number. nor will actual unity or entity have any existence, and how would scientific knowledge be in existence unless there was a certain one in all things? But truly, if they are one in number, each of the first principles also will be one, and not, as in the case of sensibles, one principle of one thing, and another of another, as for instance of this syllable, when it is the same in species. The first principles also are the same in species, for these likewise are different in number, and if this be not the case, but if the first principles of entities are one in number, there will not be in existence anything else besides the elements, for to speak of one in number, or of the singular, makes no difference, for so we speak of the singular as one in number, and of the universal as that which is common to these. Just therefore does the case stand, as if the elements of voice should be limited in number, all the letters necessarily must be in number as many as the elements, since neither two nor more than two of them would be the same. Section 1. But a doubt of no less difficulty has been overlooked, both by modern investigators and by our predecessors, namely, as to whether the first principles of things corruptible and of things incorruptible be the same or different. For if indeed they are the same, how is it the case that some things are incorruptible and others corruptible, and from what cause does this difference arise? Those of the Hesiotic school, and all as many as are theologians, fix their thoughts only upon the probable as it appeared to themselves. But they have treated us with disdain, for, seeing that they make the first principles gods, and to have been produced from gods, whatsoever did not taste of the nectar and ambrosia they say are mortal, palpably speaking of these denominations as expressive of things that are known to themselves. Respecting, however, the actual adducing of these causes, they have spoken beyond our comprehension. For if, indeed, the immortals partake of these for the sake of pleasure, the nectar and ambrosia are, in no respect, the causes of their existence, and if these are the causes of their existence, how would they be eternal, when thus requiring sustenance? But respecting those fabulous systems of philosophy, it is not worth one's while considering them with seriousness. But from those who make assertions by demonstration, it is necessary to ascertain in our inquiries why, forsooth, if entities are from the same source, some of them are in their nature eternal, and why others of these entities are subject to decay. But inasmuch as they neither mention a cause of this, and as it is not reasonable that the case should be so, it is manifest that the first principles of these would not be the same, nor would there be the same causes of them. For also, one whom any person would suppose to speak particularly consistent with himself, namely Empedocles, has likewise experienced the same difficulty. For he indeed is for establishing discord, which is a first principle in his system, as a certain cause of corruption. Nevertheless, this would seem, however, also to produce entities that are beyond the one. For from this are produced all the other works of creation, except the Deity. The following at least are the words of Empedocles. Quote, from which are all things, as many as were, and are, and shall be after, and trees therefrom have blossomed, and men and women, and beasts and birds, and water-fed fishes, and even the long-lived gods. Close quote. And the subsistence of all things independent of these is manifest. For unless discord were inherent in things, all things would have been one, as he says, for when they would have come together, then last in the conglomeration would stand discord. Wherefore also it happens to him, in his system, that the Deity, who is supremely happy, should be less prudent than the rest of beings, for he does not know all the elements, for he is not in possession of discord, but the knowledge of the like is through the like. Quote, for indeed, says he, by earth we see earth, and by water, water, and ether divine by ether, and through fire the ruinous fire, and by concord, concord, and by gloomy discord, discord. But to return to the point from whence our discourse digressed, this, at all events, is evident, that it happens, according to the theory of Empedocles, that discord is no more the cause of corruption than of existence, and in like manner that neither is harmony a cause of existence more than of corruption. For while collecting things into unity, it is a cause of corruption to other things. And at the same time also he mentions no cause of the actual transmutation, save that the thing is thus constituted by nature to take place. Mark his words, But when mighty discord was nourished in the members, and rose up to the honours of deified time, who, holding the sway over them alternately, had, in the end, surpassed the ample objects of God's adjuration. As if, indeed, it were a thing necessary that a change should take place. But he does not bring to light any necessary cause. But, nevertheless, thus much at least he only asserts consistently, for he does not constitute some entities corruptible, and others incorruptible, but all corruptible, except the elements. But the source of perplexity now mentioned is this. Why, if entities spring from the same source, some of them are incorruptible, and some of them are not so? That, therefore, the first principles of things would not be the same, let this much suffice to have been spoken. But if the first principles of things be different, one matter of doubt indeed is, whether these also will be incorruptible or corruptible. For if indeed they are corruptible, it is manifest that it is requisite that these also should spring from certain entities, for all things perish into those from whence they derive their being. Wherefore it happens that to principles there are other first principles that are prior. But this is impossible, both on the supposition of the progression being stationary at some stage of its progress, and on the supposition of its going on to infinity. And, moreover, how will things perishable subsist, if the first principles will be destroyed? But if these principles are imperishable, why indeed from these that are things imperishable will arise those that are perishable, but from the others those that are imperishable? For this is not reasonable, but either is impossible or requires for its establishment much rational support. And further, neither has any one attempted to enumerate different ones, but speculators assign the same first principles of all things, the first subject of doubt. However, they entertain slightly regarding it as something trifling. Section 2. But also the most difficult point of all to examine into, and the most necessary for the discovery of truth, is whether entity and unity are substances of entities, and whether each of them, not being anything else, this is unity, and that is entity, or whether it is necessary to investigate what, at length, unity and entity are, as if another nature were the subject to these. For some truly in that way, and some in this, suppose their nature to be disposed. For Plato, indeed, and the Pythagoreans do not regard entity as anything different from unity, but that this is their nature, that it should be the same thing, for the substance to be one, and to be a certain entity. But amongst natural philosophers, Empedocles, for instance, as if conducting the inquiry to that which is more known, says that unity is entity. For he would seem to affirm that this is harmony, at least this is a cause in his system of unity being found in all things. But others say that fire, and some that air is this unity and entity, from whence that entities both arise and are produced. So in like manner is it the case also with those who lay down the existence of more elements than these. For it is likewise necessary for these to reckon unity and entity such things as whatever, at least, they affirm first principles to be. But it happens, unless one will set down the existence of unity and entity as a certain substance, that not any of the rest of the universals will have any subsistence, for these are universal pre-eminently above all. But if unity itself be not some particular thing, nor entity itself, much less will there be any of the other things that will have a subsistence, except those denominated singulars. But, further, on the supposition of unity not being a substance, it is evident that neither would number have a subsistence, as a certain nature that has been separated from entities. For number constitutes the monad, but the monad is the same as some certain unit. But truly, if at least actual unity and actual entity be a certain particular thing, it is necessary that the substance of that thing be entity and unity. For it is not any different thing that is universally predicated about them, but these very same things. But, doubtless, if actual entity and actual unity, at least, shall have any existence, much doubt will arise how there will subsist anything different from these. Now, I mean, how there will be more entities in existence than one. For anything different from entity has no existence. Wherefore, according to the theory of Parmenides, it must needs happen that all entities are one, and that this one constitutes entity. But in both cases there is a difficulty. For even on the supposition whether unity, doubtless, be not substance, or whether any actual unity have a subsistence, it is impossible for number to be substance. But if indeed then it has not a subsistence, it hath been previously stated why. But if it has, the same doubt presents itself respecting entity also. For from what will there be another one besides the one itself? For must not that necessarily be not one? For all entities are either one or many, each of which is one. Further, if unity itself be indivisible, according indeed to the axiom of Zeno, nothing would there be having a subsistence. For that which neither when added nor subtracted makes anything greater or less, he affirms this not to belong to the category of entities, because entity is manifestly magnitude, and if it is magnitude it is corporeal, for this in every way is entity. But the addition of such things in one way will make what is greater, and in another will not make anything so at all. As a surface and a line make that which is greater, but a point and a monad by no means have this effect. But since this philosopher speculates clumsily, and it happens that there is something that is indivisible, wherefore even in this way also hath one for him a certain reply as follows: an addition of this sort will not make a thing greater, but will make it more. Yet how, forsooth, from one or more than one of this kind will arise magnitude? For this is even like saying that a line is made up of points. But doubtless, if any one makes a supposition in this way, so that, as some say, from actual unity, and a something else that is not one, is composed number, not the less should it form a subject for investigation, why, and how, what is produced will one time be number, and another time magnitude, if what is not one be inequality and the same nature. For neither is it manifest how from one and this nature, nor how from a certain number and this nature, magnitudes would arise. Chapter 5. But a doubt connected with these is, whether numbers and bodies and surfaces and points are certain substances or not. For if they are not, it eludes our comprehension what being is, and what the substances of entities are. For passive properties and motions and relations and dispositions and ratios do not appear to signify a substance of anything. For all these are predicated respecting a certain subject, and no one of them can be said to be this or that particular thing. but things which would seem particularly to signify substance, namely water, and earth, and fire, from which compounded bodies consist, the heats and colds of these, and such like qualities, are affections, not substances, but all the while the body, which undergoes these passive conditions, alone sustains them as a certain entity, and as being a certain substance. But truly, both body is less substance than a superficies, and this latter than a line, and this than the monad, and the point, for by these is body defined. And these indeed seem capable of existence without body, but the existence of body without these seems impossible. Wherefore the majority of speculators and our predecessors considered substance and entity to be body, and the other things to be passive properties of this, so that also the first principles, those of bodies, are the first principles of entities. Subsequent investigators, however, and they too, persons that appeared endowed with more wisdom than these, supposed such to be numbers. As, therefore, we have said, unless these are substance, there is, upon the whole, no substance in existence, nor no entity, for the accidents, at least, in these it would not truly be worthy to call entities. But if, doubtless, this is acknowledged, that dimensions and points are substance rather than bodies themselves, yet we do not perceive to what sort of bodies these would belong, for that they be inherent in things that fall under cognizance of the senses, this is impossible. In this case, then, there would not be any substance in existence. Further, however, it appears that all these entities are divisions of body, one indeed into breadth, and another into depth, and a third into length. But in addition to these things, in like manner, there is in the solid every kind of figure whatsoever, so that if neither mercury is in the stone, nor the half of a cube in the cube, in such a way as has been defined, neither in this case would one surface exist in body. For if this would be the case with anything whatsoever, it would be with that which would separate the half. Now, there is the same mode of reasoning in the case of a line, and a point, and a monad. Wherefore, if body especially be substance, and if these are substance rather than this, and these have no existence, nor do certain substances exist, there eludes our comprehension what entity is, and what is the substance of entities. For in addition to the statements that have been made, those irrational consequences relating to generation and corruption also take place. For indeed, substance, when not previously existing, it comes into existence now, or when it, which formerly had an existence, afterwards ceases to exist, the substance, I say, appears to undergo these affections, namely production and corruption. But points and lines and surfaces cannot possibly arise or be destroyed, though sometimes these have a subsistence, and sometimes they have not. For when bodies mutually touch, or intersect each other at the same time that they touch, they become one, and at the same time that they intersect, they become two, so that points, lines, and surfaces, when bodies are compounded together, have no subsistence, but then have been reduced to corruption. But when bodies are divided, these rise into existence, though previously they had no existence. For a point, truly, that is indivisible is not capable of being divided into two, and if they are produced and destroyed, they are produced from something. But in a similar way is it the case respecting the present time, which is contained in duration, for neither does this admit of being generated and destroyed, but nevertheless invariably seems to be a thing that is different, not that it is, however, any particular substance. In like manner, also, it is evident that it is the case both respecting points, and lines, and surfaces, for the reasoning is the same, for all these, in like manner, are either bounds or divisions. Chapter 6. But upon the whole, would one feel perplexity, why also it is necessary to investigate into certain other entities besides sensibles and media, for example, such as we posit as forms. For if it is on this account, because mathematical entities indeed differ from those that are here in a certain other respect, yet in regard of there being many of them of the same species, there is no difference in this. Wherefore, the first principles of these will not be limited in number, as neither of all the lines which are here are the first principles limited in number, but in species, unless one takes the principle of this particular syllable, or of this particular voice, and the first principles of these will be limited in number. In like manner also is it the case with things that are intermediate, for there, likewise, things of the same species are infinite. Wherefore, unless, in addition to sensibles and mathematical entities, there are certain others, such as some call the forms, there will not be a substance, one in number and species, nor will there be certain first principles of entities, so many in number, but in species. If then this is necessary, the subsistence of forms on this account is necessary also. For even although they who make such assertions do not propound their theories with distinctness, yet it is this which they aim at, and they must needs affirm this, that each of the forms is a certain substance, and that not one of them subsists according to accident. But, doubtless, if we posit the existence of the forms, and of the first principles, as one in number, but not in species, we have declared the impossibilities which must need come to pass. Contiguous also to this inquiry is the question whether elements subsist in potentiality, or in some other manner. For if, indeed, in some other manner, there will be something else that is prior to first principles, for potentiality is prior to that cause. But it is not necessary that everything that is potential should be disposed in that way. But if elements are existent in potentiality, it is admissible that none of the entities should have a subsistence, for it is possible for that to exist which not as yet has any existence. For indeed that which has no existence is being produced, but nothing of things that are impotential is produced. And these doubts then is it necessary to moot respecting first principles. And there remains also the inquiry whether universals exist, or, as we say, singulars. For if indeed universals exist, they will not be substances, for not of those things that are general signify this particular thing, but a thing of such a sort. But the substance is this particular thing. But if it will be possible to exhibit this particular thing, and that which thereof may in common be predicated, in such a case many animals will Socrates himself be, and man and animal, if each signify this certain particular thing, and that which is one. If indeed, therefore, first principles are universal, these consequences take place. But if they are not universal, but are as singulars, they will not be objects of scientific knowledge. For the sciences are conversant about all things that are universal. Wherefore will there be different first principles prior to principles, namely, those that are predicated universally in case there is likely to be a science of them. End of chapter 6 and end of book 2. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 1 of Book 3 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. There is a certain science which makes, as the object of its speculation, entity, as far forth as it is entity, and the things which are essentially inherent in this. But this is the same with none of those which are called particular sciences, for none of the rest of the sciences examines universally concerning entity so far forth as it is entity, but cutting away a certain portion of it, they investigate what is accidental in regard of this, as, for example, the mathematical sciences. But whereas we are in search of first principles and the topmost causes, it is evident that they must needs be absolutely of a certain nature. If, therefore, they also who investigate the elements of entities were accustomed to investigate these first principles, it is necessary, likewise, that the elements of entity should not have a subsistence according to accident, but so far forth as they are entities. Wherefore also must we ascertain the first causes of entity, so far as it is entity. Chapter 2. Now, entity is spoken of in various senses indeed, but in reference to one, and to one certain nature, and not equivocally, but in like manner also, as everything conducive to health is termed so in reference to health, partly indeed in its preserving that state, and partly in giving rise to it, and partly in being an indication of health, and partly in being receptive of it. And in like manner as the medicinal is styled so in reference to the art of medicine, for indeed a thing is called medicinal partly in reference to its possessing the medicinal power, partly in its being by nature adapted for the possession of such, and partly in its being the work of the medicinal art. And we shall receive the predication of other things in a similar manner with these. Thus, however, is entity also spoken of in various ways indeed, but every entity in reference to one first cause. For some things, because they are substances, are styled entities, but others because they are affections of substance, but others because they are a way to substance, either as corruptions, or privations, or qualities, or things formative or generative of substance, or of those which are spoken of in reference to substance, or the negations of any of these, or of substance. Wherefore also the non-entity we pronounce to be non-entity. As then there is one science of all things pertaining to health, in like manner also is this so in the case of other things. For it is the province of one science to speculate concerning not only those things spoken of according to one, but also those spoken of in reference to a single nature. For these also, in a certain manner, are spoken of in accordance with one. It is evident, therefore, that it is the province of a single science to speculate concerning entities, so far forth as they are entities. But in every respect is the science of ontology strictly a science of that which is first or elemental, both on which the other things depend, and through which they are denominated. If then this is substance, the philosopher or metaphysician must needs be in possession of the first principles and causes of substances. Now, of every genus there is both one sense of each, and one science, as, for instance, grammatical science is one, and speculates into all vocal sounds. Wherefore, to speculate into, also, the number of the species of entity, and the species of the species, belongs to a science one in kind. If, therefore, entity and unity are the same thing, and one nature, from the fact of their following each other as first principle and cause, yet they are not manifested by a single definition. There is, however, no difference should we even make our suppositions in regard of them after a similar manner. Nay, even rather is it for the advantage of the present inquiry, for it is the same thing, one man and the entity man and man, and not anything different does it make manifest, according to a repetition of the expression, to say man is, and one man. But it is evident that there is no separation of being, either in the case of production or corruption. But in like manner also is it the case with unity, Wherefore it is manifest that addition in these implies the same thing, and that nothing different is unity from entity. And further, the substance of each thing is one not according to accident, and in like manner also is it the case with any entity whatsoever. Therefore, as numerous as are the species of unity, so numerous also are those of entity, into the nature of which it is the province of the same science in kind to investigate. Now, I speak, for instance, of sameness and similarity, and of the other things of this sort, and of those that are in opposition to these, and almost all contraries are reduced to this first principle. These points, however, have formed the subject matter of our inquiries in our treatise styled, A Selection of Contraries, and so many portions of philosophy are there as there are, at least, substances. Wherefore is it necessary that there should be a certain first philosophy, and one next in order belonging to these. For unity and entity are things straightway involving genera, wherefore also the sciences will follow upon these. For the philosopher or metaphysician is as one that is styled a mathematician, for his science also has parts, and there is a certain first and second science, and another next in order, in mathematics. But whereas it is the province of one science to investigate things that are in opposition, and since plurality is opposed to unity, it is also the province of one science to speculate into negation and privation, on account of both kinds of inquiry being possible in the case of unity, of which there is the negation or the privation, either absolutely affirmed that such does not reside therein, or in a certain genus thereof. In this case indeed, therefore, the difference is present in unity, with the exception of that which is inherent in negation, for negation is the absence of that, and in privation also is there a certain subject nature of which the privation is predicated. Now, plurality is opposed to unity, wherefore also the things that are in opposition to those that have been mentioned, namely both diversity and dissimilarity and inequality, and as many other qualities as are denominated either according to the same or according to plurality and unity, it is the province of the science of metaphysics that we have alluded to examine into, among the number of which also a certain one is contrariety. For contrariety is a certain difference, but difference is diversity. Wherefore, since unity is spoken of in various ways, these also shall in many ways be spoken of. But nevertheless it is the province of one science to make known all such, for even though unity be spoken of in many ways, on that account it is not the province of a different science to investigate them. If, however, neither the definitions are capable of being reduced in accordance with one, nor in reference to one, then is it the province of a different science. But since all such are referred to what is first, as, for example, as many things as are styled one are spoken of in reference to the first one, in the same manner may the assertion be made that this science is concerning sameness and diversity and the rest of the contraries. Wherefore, in dividing how many modes each is expressed by, in this way must reference be made to what is first or original in each category, in order to ascertain how it is expressed in reference to that. For things will be denominated partly by reason of having those primaries, and partly that they are causes of them, and partly according to other such modes. Therefore is it evident, as has been stated in the doubts, that it is the province of one science to institute an inquiry concerning these, and concerning substance, but this was one of those inquiries that have been mentioned in the doubts. And it is the part of the philosopher to be able to speculate about all the foregoing subjects of inquiry, for if it be not the province of the philosopher, who shall there be that will be likely to examine whether he be the same person, Socrates, and Socrates sitting, or whether one be contrary to one, or what a contrary is, or in how many ways it is denominated? In like manner also is it in the case of the rest of such points for investigation. Since, therefore, these of themselves are affections of unity, so far forth as it is unity, and of entity, so far forth as it is entity, but not so far forth as they are numbers, or lines, or fire, it is evident that it is the province of that science of ontology to make known both what these are, and the accidents that are inherent in them, and not in this respect do they err who examine concerning these, as not philosophizing, but because substance, about which they understand nothing, is a thing prior in existence. Since, as there are peculiar affections of number as far as it is number, for instance, oddness, evenness, commensurability, equality, excess, defect, and as these both absolutely and relatively to one another are inherent in numbers, and since in a similar way there are other peculiar qualities in what is solid and incapable of motion, and in what is being moved, both that which is without weight, and that which has weight, so also in entity, so far forth as it is entity, are there certain peculiar properties, and these are they about the truth of which it is the province of the philosopher or ontologist to enquire. Now, a proof of this is the following. For dialecticians and sophists assume, indeed, the same figure as the philosopher, for sophistical is only apparent wisdom, and dialecticians dispute about all things. To all, however, is entity common, but they dispute concerning these evidently from the cause of these being proper subjects of inquiry for philosophy. For, indeed, sophistry and dialectics are employed about the same genus as philosophy is, but philosophy differs from the one in the mode of power, and from the other in the choice of life, and again, dialectic science is merely tentative of the knowledge of those things that philosophy has already actually reached, but sophistic science is only apparent and not real. And the same is further proved from the fact that a different coordination of contraries is privation, and all things are referred to entity and non-entity, and to unity and plurality. As, for instance, rest in its nature partakes of unity, and motion of plurality, but that entities and substance are compounded of contraries, almost all men acknowledge. All, at least, assert the first principles to be contraries, according to some, indeed, these principles being odd and even, and according to others, hot and cold, and according to others, finite and infinite, and others, harmony and discord. But all the rest of such are referred apparently to unity and plurality. For let this reduction be received by us as is done in the first book of our work, concerning the good. Now, there it appears that first principles, both altogether and as is acknowledged by others, fall under these genera. From these statements, therefore, is it also evident that to investigate entity, so far forth as it is entity, is the province of one science. For all things are either contraries or composed from contraries, but the first principles also of contraries are unity and plurality, and these are belonging to the department of one science, whether the predication be made according to one or not, as perhaps the truth is. But, nevertheless, even though unity be spoken of in many ways, to the first will the rest be reduced, and the contraries in like manner. And for this reason, even though entity and unity be not universal and the same, in the case of all things, or separable as perhaps they are not, Yet some things, no doubt, are referred to unity, but others to that next in order, and for this reason it is not the business of the geometer to investigate into what the contrary is, or the perfect, or unity, or entity, or identity, or diversity, save only from hypothesis. That, therefore, it is the province of one science to investigate entity, so far forth as it is entity, and the things therein existing, so far forth as they constitute entity, is evident, and that the same science is speculative not only of substances, but also of things that are inherent in substances, and of the particulars enumerated both concerning priority and subsequence, and genus and species, and whole and part, and the rest of each. This is evident also. Chapter 3. But we must determine whether it is the province of one science, or a different one, to speculate concerning axioms, as they are called in mathematics, and concerning substance. Doubtless it is manifest that it is belonging to one, and that the science of the philosopher, and the investigation of such enquirer, is respecting these. For in all entities are they inherent, but not in any genus separate distinctly from the rest, and all investigators employ them, indeed, because they belong to entity, so far forth as it is entity. Each genus, however, constitutes entity. And thus far do they employ them as is sufficient for their purpose, but that is as far as they comprise the genus about which they bring forward their demonstrations. Wherefore, since it is evident that they are inherent in all things, as far as they are entities, for this is held by these in common, the speculation of them belongs to the philosopher, whose business it is to make known the truth concerning entity, so far forth as it is entity, and concerning these. Therefore, no one of those who are partial inquirers attempts to say aught concerning these, whether they are true or not, neither, for instance, the geometer nor the arithmetician. Some of the natural philosophers, however, in doing so, act reasonably, for they alone are accustomed to think that it is their province to examine concerning the whole of nature, and concerning entity. But since there is something of a higher order than the physical, for nature is merely one certain genus of entity, the investigation in regard of these should belong to the universal, and to that which is speculative of the first substance. Now, I admit there is a certain wisdom, namely, even the physical, but it is not the first. As many things, however, as certain of those who speak concerning the truth of axioms attempt to lay down, in what way they ought to be admitted, they do this from ignorance of analytics. For they ought to approach such a subject who are instructed therein beforehand, but whilst hearers they should not be investigators. That, therefore, it is the part of the philosopher and of the enquirer concerning substance in its entirety, so far forth as it is such by nature to examine also in regard of syllogistic principles, is evident. But it is becoming that one especially furnishing information about each genus should be competent to speak of the very surest principles of the thing. And therefore the same holds true of a person that is engaged in the investigation of entities, so far forth as they are entities. I mean that he should be able to adduce the most firm principles of all. Now this is the philosopher, and the most firm first principle of all is that concerning which there can be no possibility of deception, for such must needs be that which is most known. For those points respecting which men do not impart knowledge are all exposed to deception in, and it must needs likewise be a thing independent of hypothesis. For a principle which one must be in possession of who understands any entity whatsoever, this is not an hypothesis, but what one must make known in the manifestation of anything whatsoever, he must also needs come forward furnished with this. That therefore, indeed, such is the most firm first principle of all is evident. Now, what this principle is we shall after this declare. For the same thing to be present and not be present at the same time in the same subject, and according to the same, is impossible. And whatsoever things we have further defined, let these be so defined in respect of their logical difficulties. This, however, is the most firm of all first principles, for it involves the distinction spoken of above. For it is impossible to suppose that anything whatsoever is the same, and is not the same, as certain think that Heraclitus asserts. For it is not necessary, as far as concerns what one asserts to exist, to suppose that these also do exist. But if it is not admissible that contraries at the same time should subsist in the same subject, now the usual definitions have been additionally made by us to this proposition. And if an opinion contrary to an opinion be that of contradiction, it is evident that it is impossible for the same enquirer to suppose that at the same time the same thing should be and not be, for one labouring under deception in regard of this would entertain contrary opinions at the same time. Wherefore all who employ demonstration reduce the matter to this last opinion. For by nature this also is the first principle of all the rest of the axioms. End of chapter 3. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 4 of Book 3 of Metaphysics by Aristotle. Translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 4. Now, there are certain philosophers who, as we have intimated, themselves both affirm that it is possible that the same thing may and may not be, and that they really think so. This principle, however, do many of the investigators of nature employ. But we just now have assumed it as a thing impossible in the case of an entity that it should be and not be at the same time, and by means of this have we demonstrated that this is the most firm of all principles. Now some also demand a demonstration of this from ignorance. For it is ignorance the not knowing what things one ought to seek a demonstration of, and of what things he ought not. For indeed, upon the whole, it is impossible that there should be a demonstration of all things, for one would go on in this case to infinity, so that there would not be any demonstration at all in this way. If, however, there be some things of which we should not seek a demonstration, what they in preference require such a first principle to be, they have not the ability to affirm. But it is possible to demonstrate concerning this, by refutation, that it is impossible, if only he would affirm anything who doubts. But if he makes no assertion, it would be ridiculous, the seeking an argument against him who had not a reason to put forward about anything, so far as he had no such reason. For an adversary of this sort, as far now as he is such, would be like unto a plant. Now, I say, demonstration by refutation differs from demonstration simply, or properly so called, because he that employs demonstration would seem to require what is the principle in the beginning, but on the supposition of the existence of another cause of such a kind, it would be a refutation and not a demonstration. Now, a commencement of a discussion in regard of all such points is, not the demanding the declaration that either a thing exists, or doth not exist. For this, one would imagine, perhaps, was the asking the principle assumed originally, but the demanding the signification, at least, of a thing, both as for oneself and for another. For this also amounts to a necessity if he is to say anything at all. For if he does not, there would be no possibility of a rational discussion with such a one, neither for himself relatively to himself, nor to another. If any one, however, would grant this, there will be a demonstration in existence, for now will there actually be in existence something that has been determined. But the cause is not the person demonstrating, but the person sustaining the argument. For by overturning the discussion, he yet sustains the discussion, and further, he that acquiesces in this, hath acquiesced in the truth of something independent of demonstration, so that not everything would be so and not so. In the first place, indeed, therefore, it is evident that this very assertion is true, because the name signifies the existence or the non-existence of this particular thing, so that not everything would be so and not so in this particular way. Further, if man signifies one thing, let this be a two-footed animal. Now I say that this signifies one thing, if this be man. Whatever is a man, this, namely, the being a two-footed animal, is the being in man. But there is no difference should any one assert that more is thereby signified, provided only they have been reduced under proper definitions. For grant that upon each definition a different name may have been imposed. Now I say, for example, if he would not assert that man signifies one, but many things, of one of which there is a single definition, namely, two-footed animal, yet also are there many others, but defined according to number, for its own proper denomination might be set down according to each of the definitions. But if its proper denomination should not be thus set down, but one would say that such signified an infinity of things, it is palpable that there would not be a definition of it at all. For the signifying not any one thing is the signifying nothing, and when the denominations are devoid of meaning, there is an end to mutual discussion, and also in reality to discussion on the part of a man with himself. For it is not possible that a person should understand anything that is not capable of understanding one thing. But if it were possible, one name would be imposed on this thing. Let it doubtless be granted, as has been stated in the commencement, that a name significant of something be significant of one thing also. It is not therefore possible that being in man signifies the same particular thing as the not being in man, if man is significant not merely of what is predicated of one, but even one thing itself. For this we do not require, that the one should signify that which is predicated of one. Since if the case stands in this way, at least, the musical, and the white, and the man, would signify one thing, so that all things would be one, for they would be synonymous, and it will not be possible that the same thing be, and not be, save by equivocation, just as if we would call any one a man whom others would call a not man. The subject of doubt, however, is not this, if it is possible that the same thing at the same time should be and not be the man nominally, but really. But if the name man and the name not man do not signify anything different, it is evident that the not being man will not differ from the being man, wherefore the being man will be the not being man. For they will be one thing. For this signifies that they are one, as a tunic and a cloak, if there is one definition of each. And if they shall be one, the being man and the not being man signify one thing, but it has been demonstrated that they signify a different thing. There is a necessity, therefore, of this consequence, if there be a particle of truth in the assertion, that man in signification is equipolent with the being a two-footed animal, for this was what the expression man was assumed to signify. Now, if there exists a necessity that this be the case, it is not possible for this very thing not to be a two-footed animal then, for this doth the phrase, quote, the being a necessity, close quote, signify, namely, the impossibility of its not being man. Accordingly, it is not possible to be true to say at the same time that the same thing is both a man and is not a man. But there prevails the same mode of reasoning in the case of the not being man also. For the being of a man and the not being of a man signify a different thing, if truly both the being white and the being man are different. For much more is their opposition in this case to justify the difference of signification. But if, also, one would say that the white signifies one and the same thing with the being man, again will we make the same assertion as has been declared on a former occasion, namely, that all things will be one, and not merely things in opposition. But if this be not possible, that which has been declared will happen, if the question asked be answered. If, however, when a simple question is put, one subjoin negations also, the question actually put is not replied to, for nothing hinders the same thing being both man and white, and other things 10,000 in multitude. But, nevertheless, if the question be asked, if it is true to affirm man to be this, or not to be so, the reply should be that it signifies one thing, and no addition should be made that it is both white and large. For also it is impossible to go through accidents when, at least, they are infinite. Either, therefore, let one go through all or none. In like manner, therefore, if also 10,000 times over they are the same thing, namely, man and not man, the reply to the question if man is, should not be that at the same time also not man is, unless the reply likewise states, in addition, the rest of whatsoever things are accidents, as many as are so, and as many as are not. If this, however, be not done by the person asked the question, there is nothing under discussion at all. But in general, they who make this assertion overturn substance and essence, or the formal cause and very nature of a thing. For they must themselves needs affirm all things to be accidents, and that the essence of man or animal, whatsoever it be, has no existence. For if there will exist the essential nature of anything whatsoever, such as is that which is to be man, this will not be to be not man, or not to be man, although these are negations of this. For it was one thing which it signified, and this was the substance of a certain thing. But the signification of the substance of a thing is, that not anything else is the being of that thing. But if the being whatsoever man is will be found in this, being either whatsoever is not man, or whatsoever not is man, is a thing impossible, for it will be a something different. Wherefore it will be necessary for them to say that a formal and substantial definition of this kind, and one invariably suited unto the subject, will be one of a nonentity. But all things, as we have supposed, are according to accident. For in this lies the distinction between substance and accident. For the white is an accident in man, because he is white, but not anything whatsoever that is white. But if all things are spoken of according to accident, there will be no primary universal, if an accident always signifies a predication about a certain subject. There is a necessity, then, of going on in a progression to infinity, but this is impossible, for more than two of such are not connected together. For accident is not a thing that is accidental to that which is an accident, unless that both are accidental in the same subject. Now, I say this, for example, in the instance of the white being musical, and the latter being white, because both are accidents in man, but not on this account is Socrates musical, because it happens that both are accidents in a certain other subject. Since accidents, therefore, are spoken of some in this way and some in that, as many as are so expressed, as the white in Socrates, it is not possible should be infinite in an ascending series of productions in the case of man, as, for example, that in Socrates, the white, there should be some other different accident, for any one thing is not produced from all. Nor truly in the white will be found any different accident, as for instance the musical, for also in no wise rather is this an accident in that than that in this, and at the same time the distinction has been made that some things are accidents after this manner, but others as the musical in Socrates. But as to as many things as are accidental in this way, such are accidents not in such a way as an accident in what is accidental, but this is the case with whatsoever is accidental in that other way. Wherefore all things will not be spoken of according to accident. Something then will there be significant also as of substance, and if this be so, it has been demonstrated that it is impossible that at the same time contradictions should be predicated of the same subject. Further, if all contradictions are true at the same time concerning the same thing, it is manifest that all things will be one. For the same thing will it be both a trireme, and a wall, and a man, if it is possible to affirm or deny anything of everything, as there is a necessity for those to do who assert the opinion of Protagoras. For if also to any one a man seems not to be a trireme, it is evident that he will not be a trireme. Wherefore also he is, if the contradiction be true. And doubtless comes to pass a saying of Anaxagoras, at the same time subsist together all things, so that in reality nothing is one. The indefinite, therefore, they seem to speak of, and thinking that they mention entity, they talk about nonentity. For an entity in capacity, and not in actuality, constitutes the indefinite. But doubtless must we say to the authors of this hypothesis, that of everything either an affirmation or a negation must be predicated, for it would be absurd if in each thing there will be inherent the negation of itself, but that the negation of what is different, and which is not inherent therein, will have no existence. Now I say, for example, if it is true to assert of a man that he is not a man, it is manifest also that he is not a trireme. If indeed, therefore, there is truth in the affirmation, there is a necessity that also there be truth in the negation. But if there is not truth in the affirmation, the negation at least of a trireme will more appertain to him than the negation of himself. If, therefore, that also be true, there will also be truth in the negation of the trireme, and if in the negation of this, in the affirmation also. And these consequences happen to those who make such a statement, even to the effect that it is not necessary to employ either affirmation or negation. For if it is true that the same individual is man and not man, it is evident that such a one will be neither man nor not man. For of those two qualities there are two negations. But if that is one which is composed of both, this one would also be in opposition. Further, indeed, respecting all things it is so, and a thing will be white and not white, and entity and nonentity, and it will be so respecting the rest of the assertions and negations in a similar manner. Or this will not be the case, but only so regarding some, and not regarding others. And if, doubtless, it were not so respecting all, these would be indisputable. But if it be true concerning all, again, no doubt, in the case of whatsoever there is an assertion, there will also be a negation, and in the case of whatsoever there is a negation, there will likewise be an assertion. Or in the case of whatsoever there is an assertion, there will also be a negation. Or of whatsoever indeed there is an assertion, there is also a negation. But of whatsoever things there is a negation, of all such there will not be an assertion. And if this be so, there would be something indubitably a nonentity, and this will be a firm opinion. And if to be a nonentity be something both firm and known, more firm would be the opposite assertion. And if in like manner also it is necessary that in the case of whatsoever things one employs a negation, he should employ an affirmation also, it would be true undoubtedly by dividing to say either that a thing, for instance, is white, and again that it is not white, or that this would not be true. And if indeed it is not true, by dividing to say so, he does not affirm these things, and there is nothing in existence. But how can one speak of nonentities, or understand anything respecting them, or thus move forward in the paths of knowledge? and all things would be one, as it has been said heretofore, and both man and God and trireme and the contradictions of them will be the same. But if in like manner this be so in the case of each thing, in no wise will one thing differ from another, for if there will be a difference, this will be true, and a peculiarity of this. In like manner also, if it is possible that he who makes the division should speak the truth, there happens that which has been declared. And to this reason we may subjoin the following, that all would speak the truth, and all would speak falsely, and one would acknowledge himself to be speaking what is false. At the same time, however, it is evident that the investigation with such a person is concerning nothing, for he affirms nothing, for neither in this manner nor in that is the assertion made with such a one, but in this manner and not in this manner. And again, at least, with respect to these points, he makes a negation of both, because the assertion is made that they are neither so in this manner, nor not in this manner, but both in this manner, and not in this manner. For if this were not the case, there would now be in existence something that has been defined. Further, if when an assertion be true, the negation be false, and if when the latter itself be true, the affirmation be false, it would not be possible at the same time to assert and deny the same thing with truth. But perhaps persons will say that this is what has been laid down from the commencement. Further, does one who supposes that in a manner a thing either is so and so, or that it is not so, labour under a misapprehension? But he who thinks that it is both, does he speak truth or can he verify his assertion? For if he affirms truth, what is the assertion, save that such is the nature of entities? And if he does not affirm the truth, but rather he speaks truth, who makes a supposition in that way, entities in such a case would in a certain manner be now disposed thus. And would this be true, and not so at the same time, and yet in reality not true? But if in like manner all both speak falsehood and speak truth, it is not possible for such either to utter or to declare anything, for at the same time he says the same things and not the same things. But if he makes no supposition, but in the same way thinks and does not think, in what way will he be disposed differently from plants? Whence also it is especially manifest that no one either of the rest of the sceptics or of those making this statement is so affected. For why, may I ask, does he walk towards Megara, but not remain still, thinking that he is actually walking? Nor straightway at dawn does he proceed to a well or a precipice, if he may chance to meet with such. He, however, appears cautious, as not considering the falling into it to be not good, and to be good in the same sense. It is evident, accordingly, that the one he considers preferable, but the other as not preferable. And, if this be the case, both the one he must needs consider a man, and the other not a man, and the one thing sweet, and the other not sweet. For not as of equal importance doth he investigate and regard all things, inasmuch as he thinks it better to drink water and to visit a certain person, and then seeks in point of fact for those very things, although he ought to seek for all things with equal zest, if in like manner it were the same thing. I mean to say both man and not man. But, as has been declared, there is no one who does not appear cautious in regard of the one set of things, and not so in regard of the other. Wherefore, as it appears, all men suppose that the case is absolutely so, if not concerning all things at least, concerning what is better and worse. Now, if they do so not from scientific knowledge, but from opinion, much more must attention be paid to truth, just as also the health of one that is diseased must be looked after more than that of a person that is sound. For he that indulges in theory or surmise, compared with one possessed of scientific knowledge, is not healthfully disposed towards truth. Further, although as much as possible all things should especially be so and not so, yet at any rate the more and the less are inherent in the nature of entities. For one would not say that 2 and 3 were similarly even, nor does a person in the same manner assert an untruth who thinks 4 5, as he who thinks it 1,000. If, therefore, he be not deceived, in the same manner it is evident that the other is less deceived in this way, so that he affirms what is more true. If, therefore, that which is more true be more immediate to the truth, there would be something true at least, to which what is more contiguous will be more true. And even if nothing should be true, yet now at any rate is there something that is more firm and more true than another, and so in this way would we be liberated from that intemperate theory alluded to, and one which forbids the definition of anything mentally. End of chapter 4. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 5 of Book 3 of Metaphysics by Aristotle. Translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 5. Now, from the same opinion originates also the theory of Protagoras, and in like manner is there a necessity that both of them should be or not be capable of verification. For if all things that seem so are true, and if all things that are apparent are true, then must all things at the same time be true and false. For many entertain contrary opinions to one another, and those who do not happen to think the same with themselves they regard as victims to delusion, so that the same thing must needs be and not be. And if this be the case, it is necessary that all things that seem so should be true, for opposite sentiments do they hold with one another who speak falsehood and who speak truth. If then things be so, all will speak truth. That from the same opinion then both of these theories originate is evident. There does not, however, exist the same method of conducting our controversy as regards all such philosophers. For some of them require persuasion, and some compulsion. For as many indeed as have formed opinions in this way from doubt, the ignorance of these is remediable, for the refutation is directed towards not the theory, but the understanding, and as many as speak for argument's sake, refutation is a cure also of these, both of that discourse which consists in voice, and of that which consists in names. But unto those persons who labour under doubt in this way has the opinion itself originated from sensibles. The opinion, I mean, that contradictions and things contrary subsist together, inasmuch as they see contraries arising from the same thing. If, therefore, it is not possible that nonentity should come into existence, in a similar way, according to them, must the thing have pre-existed, namely, as both contraries at once, as also Anaxagoras says, and Democritus, that everything was mingled in everything. For also this latter philosopher maintained that vacuity and fullness are similarly resident in any part whatsoever, although the one of these is entity, and the other nonentity. Respecting indeed, therefore, those who form their opinions from these data, we will say that in a certain manner they speak correctly, and that in a certain sense they are involved in ignorance. For entity is spoken of in a twofold point of view, so that it is in a way admissible that something should arise from that which has no being, and that it is in a way not admissible that it should be so, and that the same thing at the same time should be an entity and a nonentity, but not according to the same entity. For in capacity, no doubt, is it admissible at the same time for the same thing to be contraries, but in actuality not so. And further, shall we deem them to suppose the existence of a certain other substance of entities, in which is inherent neither motion, nor corruption, nor generation at all? And in like manner also has the truth respecting the things apparent reached some speculators from sensibles, for they do not consider it fitting that the true should be decided by plurality or fewness, but the same thing seems sweet to some on tasting it, and to others bitter. Wherefore, if all persons were sick, or all beside themselves, but 2 or 3 were sound in health, or in possession of their mind, it would happen that these latter would appear to be ill, and labouring under an aberration of intellect, but that the rest would not seem so. Further, to many of the rest of the animal creation do contraries appear to be the same thing as well as to us, and to each very person with himself things do not always, according to sense, appear to be the same. Which description of these, therefore, is true, or false, is obscure. For nothing the more is this true than that, but both in like manner are affected as regards truth. Wherefore Democritus says, at least, that, positively, either nothing is true, or that if it be so, that to us it is wrapped in obscurity. But, upon the whole, on account of their supposing prudence, no doubt to be sense, and that this sense constitutes an alteration, these persons affirm that the apparent, according to sense, is necessarily true. For from these sceptics, both Empedocles and Democritus, and each of the other philosophers, so to speak, have become entangled in opinions of this sort. For Empedocles also asserts that those changing their habit change their prudence. Witness his words, for the present counsel varies in men, and in other passages he says that, as far as diverse men become, so far is present also in them always diverse thought. And Parmenides evinces the same mode of thinking, for instance in the words, for as each has a tempering of graceful limbs, so present in man is mind. For the same thing with whatever thinks is the nature of limbs in men, both every and all, for more than this is mind. And the apothegm of Anaxagoras also is remembered amongst certain of his associates, namely, that entities are such to them as they may have supposed them. Now, they say that even Homer seems to have been in possession of this opinion, because he made Hector, after he was deranged from the wound, to lie in a delirious state, as if even those of unsound mind were capable of exercising thought, indeed, but not the same thoughts as with those of sound mind. It is evident, therefore, if both be exertions of prudence, that also entities subsist in this way, and not in this way, at the same time. Wherefore also most difficult is that which ensues from this theory, for if they, who particularly perceived as true that which it is admissible should be true, but these are they who especially seek after it and love it, if these persons hold such opinions, and manifest such tenets respecting truth, how is it not becoming those to despair who attempt to philosophize? For the pursuit of things eluding their grasp would constitute the investigation of truth. But a cause of this opinion of theirs is the following, that from time to time they have examined into the truth concerning entities no doubt, but the entities they have supposed to be sensibles merely. Now in these is inherent much of the nature of the indefinite, and that of entity which subsists in such a manner as we have declared. Wherefore they speak naturally, but they do not speak things that are true. For so is it more in harmony for them to speak after this manner than as Epicharmus in his reply to Xenophanes. But, moreover, seeing the whole of this visible nature in motion, but respecting what is being changed, seeing nothing verified, regarding at least what is being changed altogether and everywhere, they considered that verification was not a thing that is possible. For from this hypothesis blossomed that most extreme opinion of those philosophers mentioned just now, namely, that of those speculators who profess to adopt the philosophy of Heraclitus, and such as Cratylus held, who at last was of opinion that one ought to speak of nothing, but moved merely his finger, and who rebuked Heraclitus for saying that it is not possible to enter the same river twice, for he himself was of opinion that you could not do so once. In reply, however, to this theory, we will also say that there is some foundation in reason for their supposing with these that that which undergoes a change, when it does change, may not be considered as existing. This, however, is a circumstance attended with doubtfulness, for the rejecting substance retains something of that which is rejected, and of that which is being produced must there now necessarily exist something, and if, in short, it is undergoing corruption, there will subsist a certain entity, and if it is being produced, there must needs be that from which it is produced, and by which it is generated, and that this process goes not on in a progression to infinity. Omitting, however, these arguments, let us make those assertions following, namely, that not the same thing is the alteration according to quantity and according to quality. Grant, indeed, that as far as quantity goes, it does not abide the same, but it is according to form that we know all things. But further, it is worth while reproving those who think thus, because although knowing the number of sensibles themselves, and that in the case of the fewer number of sensibles this state of flux and mutation was to be found, they have yet manifested similar sentiments respecting the whole heaven. For the place about us of what is sensible continues alone to subsist in a condition of corruption and generation. But this in no wise, so to say, is part of the universe, wherefore more justly would it be, on account of the greater number of witnesses, to have acquitted these, than on account of these, the fewer, to have condemned those. And further, it is evident that in reply also to these, we may use the same arguments with those that have been originally laid down by us. For that there is some nature immovable has been demonstrated to their satisfaction, and has gained their assent. It happens, however, to those at least who say that a thing is, and is not at the same time, to affirm all things to be in a state of rest, rather than of motion. For on this hypothesis there exists nothing into which anything is changed, for all things are inherent in all. Regarding, however, the truth that not everything that is apparent is true, in the first place, indeed, it might be replied that sense, to be sure, is not deceitful in what falls within its own peculiar province, but that imagination is not the same with sense. It is worthy of consideration and wonder, in the next place, if they really are in doubt of this, whether magnitudes are so great, and colours such as they appear to those at a distance, or such as they appear to those that are near, and whether they are such as they appear to persons in health, or such as they appear to persons in sickness, and in regard of weight, whether things more weighty are such as appear so to the weak, or such as seem so to the strong, and lastly, in respect of truth, whether things are true such as appear so to the sleeping, or such as seem so to those who are awake. For that they do not, in reality, think so, at least, is evident. For no one, if even he supposes when asleep by night that he were in Athens, when he is in Libya, goes when he awakes to the Odeon. And further, respecting the future, as also Plato says, doubtless, not similarly decisive is the opinion of the physician and that of the ignorant quack, for example, as to the likelihood that one will be sound, or that one will not be so. And further, in the case of the senses themselves, not similarly decisive is the testimony of sense in respect of what is foreign, and in respect of what is its peculiar province, or of that which is near, and of that which is remote from itself. But respecting colour, it is sight and not taste that judges, and respecting juices, it is taste but not sight, each of which never at the same time affirms about the same thing that simultaneously a thing is so and not so disposed. But neither in a different period have the senses doubted about the passion at least to which they are subject, but about that in which the passion is an accident. Now I say, for example, that the same wine, either from being changed, or from the bodily organ being changed, might so appear at one time to be sweet, and at another time not sweet. But the sweet then, at least, when it is sweet, is not such, for it never has undergone a change, but always verification thereof is possible, and of necessity is it that such will be a thing that is sweet. All these theories, however, overturn this conclusion, since, also, if there is not a substance of anything, neither is there anything necessarily subsisting. For it is not admissible for the necessary to be at one time disposed one way, and at another time another. Wherefore, if there is anything of necessity, it will not be disposed both so and not so. If also, upon the whole, what is sensible exists merely, nothing would there be subsisting, inasmuch as animated beings would have no existence, for sense would have no existence. Perhaps then, on the supposition of the non-existence of sense, the truth would be that neither sensibles nor sensations exist, for of the percipient is sense and affection, but that it is impossible that the subjects themselves, which produce sense, have not any existence, even though sense exist not. For, doubtless, sense itself is not of itself, but there is something else also, different from, and independent of, sense, which must needs be prior to sense. For the moving cause is prior in nature to that which is being moved, and if these assertions are made one with another, not a whit the less is the same theory true. Chapter 6. But there are some who doubt and are sceptics, both amongst those who are persuaded of the reality of these opinions, and those who merely affirm these theories. For they ask, who is it that judgeth him that is in good health, and him that, upon the whole, is capable of forming his decision correctly about each particular? Now, doubts of such a sort as this are similar to one's doubting whether we now sleep or are awake. For all such doubts are tantamount to the same. For these persons demand that there should be a reason of all things, for they seek for a first principle, and expect to obtain this by demonstration, whereas, at least, that they are not persuaded of the validity of their position, they make manifest in their acts. But, as we have said, this is the characteristic property of these philosophers, for they seek for a reason of things of which there is no reason. For the principle of demonstration is not demonstration. These, therefore, indeed, would be easily persuaded of this, for it is not difficult to apprehend. They, however, who seek in reason compulsion merely, seek an impossibility, for what is contrary they deem it right to speak, immediately uttering contrary things. But if all things are not relatives, but some are also themselves by themselves, that is, absolute, in such a case everything apparent would not be true, for the apparent is apparent to some one. Therefore, he that says that all things apparent are true, makes all entities relatives. Wherefore also must the precaution be adopted by those who seek for compulsion in reason, and at the same time also think right to subjoin a reason that not the apparent is true, but that the apparent is true to whomever it appears so, and when it appears, and how far, and in what manner. But if they subjoin a reason, to be sure, but do not in this way subjoin it, it will happen speedily unto them that they should speak things that are contrary. For it is possible for the same thing to appear honey, as far as the sight goes, and not to appear so to the taste. And as we have two eyes, not the same will a thing appear to each organ of vision, if they be dissimilar. Whereas, in reply to those, at least, who, on account of the causes originally enumerated, affirm the apparent to be true, and for this reason contend that all things in like manner are false and true, in reply to these, I say, it may be affirmed that neither the same things appear the same to all men, nor to the same person do the same things invariably appear the same, but frequently things contrary at the same time. For the touch, in the alteration of the fingers, says that there are two objects, but the organ of sight, one. But neither to the same sense, at least, do the same things seem the same, and according to the same, and in like manner also in the same moment of time. Wherefore this would be true. But perhaps for this cause it is necessary to say to those who speak not on account of doubt, but for talk's sake, that this is not absolutely true, but that it is true relatively to this person. And as doubtless it has been formerly affirmed, it is necessary also to make all things relative, both in reference to opinion and sense, so that nothing either has been produced or will arise except on the supposition of some person previously exercising thought. But if anything has been generated or will arise, it is evident that all things would not be according to opinion. Further, if one thing exists, it exists in relation to one, or in relation to a definite thing, and if the same thing is both half and equal, such exists in relation to these, yet the equal is not in reference to the double. Now, in relation to opinion, if man and the subject of the opinion be the same, man will not be the thinking subject, but the subject of opinion. But if each thing will be in relation to the thinking subject will subsist in relation to things infinite in species. That indeed, therefore, most indisputable of all is the opinion that assertions in opposition are not at the same time true, and what happens in the way of consequence unto those who say that they are true, and why they say so, let thus much suffice to have been spoken. But since it is impossible that contradiction should be true of the same subject at the same time, it is evident that neither can contraries possibly subsist at the same time in the same subject. For indeed of contraries one or other is not the less privation, but privation of substance is negation from some definite genus. If, therefore, it is impossible at the same time to affirm and deny with truth, it is impossible that also contraries should be inherent in the same subject at the same time, but either both must be inherent partially, or the one partially, and the other simply, or absolutely. Chapter 7. But, truly, neither is it possible that there is any mean between a contradiction, but there is a necessity either of asserting or denying any one thing whatsoever of one. Now, in the first place, this is evident to those who define what truth and falsehood are. For indeed, the assertion that entity does not exist, and that non-entity does, is a falsehood, but that entity exists, and that non-entity does not exist, is truth. Wherefore, the person who affirms that this medium is in existence, or is not, will speak truth or utter falsehood. But neither is entity nor non-entity said not to exist or to exist. Further, either will there be a mean between contradiction, as that of a darkish colour between black and white, or it will be as that which is neutral between man and horse. If, therefore, this subsist in this way, there would be no change. For a change takes place from something that is not good into that which is good, or from this latter into what is not good. But now it is always apparent as taking place, for there is not a change existing, but one into opposites and media. If, however, there is a mean, so also would there be a certain production into a thing that is white, not from that which is not white, but this is not perceived as being the case. Further, everything intelligible and mental the understanding either affirms or denies, and this is manifest from definition when truth is spoken, or falsehood, when indeed in this way it is composed as an assertion or negation, truth is spoken, but when in that way, falsehood. Further, must there be in all contradictions a mean, save where the assertion is made only for argument, or talk's sake, so that also one will neither utter truth nor not utter truth, and besides entity and non-entity there will be something in subsistence. Wherefore, besides generation and corruption, some change will there be. Moreover, in whatsoever genera negation introduces the contrary, in these also will be found this medium, as, for example, in numbers a number neither odd nor not odd. Such, however, is impossible, and from the definition is this evident. Further, would we go on in a progression to infinity, and not only will there be sesquialterate entities, but even more than this. For again, it will be possible to deny this in regard of the assertion and negation of the medium of the former contradiction. And this will be something, for there will be a certain other substance of this. Moreover, as to the question if a thing is white when one says that it is not, nothing has he denied than that it is, but that a thing is not amounts to a negation. But from the same source as other paradoxes has this opinion reached unto certain speculators. For when they are unable to solve arguments open to dispute, giving in to reason, they consent to the truth of whatever is brought out by syllogism. Some therefore make assertions from some such cause as this, but others on account of requiring in their investigations the reason of all things. The principle, however, in respect of all these is to be derived from definition, but definition arises from their necessarily signifying something, for the sentence of which the name is assigned becomes the definition of a thing, and the theory of Heraclitus, affirming all things to be and not to be, appeared to make all things true, but that of Anaxagoras was, that there is a certain medium between contradiction, so that all things are false, for when they are mingled, neither is the mixture good nor not good, wherefore there is nothing that one can affirm as true. Chapter 8. Now, these distinctions having been laid down, it is evident that the predications made in one way only, and also those that are made about all, it is impossible should be as certain affirm they are. Some indeed saying that nothing is true, for nothing, they say, hinders all things from being in such a way as that the diagonal of a square is commensurable with its side, but others affirming that all things are true, for almost all these assertions are the same with those of Heraclitus. For this philosopher, in affirming that all things are true and all things false, affirms also, separately, each of these theories. Wherefore, if those are impossible, it is impossible likewise that these should be so. But further are those palpably contradictions which, likewise, it is not possible should at the same time be true. Nor, doubtless, is it possible that all should be false, although, at least, it would the rather seem to be admissible from what has been stated. But in reply to all such theories must the question be asked, as also has been declared in the discussions above, not if there is something, or if there is not, but if something has a signification. Wherefore, from the definition is the discussion to be drawn, by assuming what falsehood or truth signifies. But if the true and the false be nothing else than to assert what is true or deny what is false, it is impossible that all things be false. For it is necessary that either portion of the contradiction be true. Further, if it be necessary either to assert or deny everything, it is impossible for both to be false, for either part of the contradiction is false. Truly also doth the common saying happen unto all such theories, that they overthrow or stultify themselves. For the person that says that all things are true renders the statement contrary to this true also. Wherefore he makes his own affirmation not true, for the contrary says that it is not true, but he that says that all things are false, even himself falsifies his own position. If, however, they make an exception, the one making an exception in the case of the contrary that it is not alone true, and the other in the case of his own assertion that it is not false, in no wise the less does it happen unto these sceptics that they require the truth and falsehood of an infinite number of assertions. For he who says that a true theory is true agrees with the affirmation that it is true, but this will go on in a progression infinity. It is evident, however, that neither they who lay down that all things are at rest speak the truth, nor they who say that all things are in motion. For if, indeed, all things are at rest, the same things will always be true and false. Now this appears to be a thing undergoing a change. For he who speaks once himself was not, and again will not be. If all things, however, are in motion, there will be nothing that is true. All things, in that case, are false. But it has been demonstrated that this is impossible. Further, must entity needs undergo a change, for from something into something is the change made. But doubtless neither are all things at rest or in motion at any particular time, but nothing subsists in such a condition of rest or motion eternally, for there is something which always moves the things that are in motion, and the first imparter of motion is itself immovable. End of chapter 8 and end of book 3. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.